myself out.
I am afraid of...
I'm terrified and paralyzed by...
I am deathly afraid of...
Welcome to the Sum of All Fears podcast with your host, me, Ryan Perrio. Hello and welcome to the Sum of All Fears podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Perrio. This week we conclude October with another spooky fear. Comedian Jay Agbon is my guest this week. Jay was a comic here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who moved to D.C. about 3 years ago. He is making a name for himself in the D.C. comedy scene. Doing well, he was back in town for a few weeks back in late September, so we agreed to do an interview. And so in this interview, we talk about his life in Washington, D.C., doing comedy in the D.C. area versus Dallas, and then we get into his fear of authentically haunted houses and how that has affected his life and growing up as in a religious family. We talk about a little bit about religion and the things we'd like to be better. So let's get into my interview with Jay Agbon. All right, my guest this week is comedian Jay Agbon. Jay was a Dallas comic, and then he has moved out to DC, where he is making comedy waves as well as working and living in the DC area, which I'm sure has a lot of interesting because there's so many cities that just like intersect in that DC area. You got Baltimore, you've got Arlington, Virginia, you've got Maryland, DC, all of this is just like intersecting in one, major city.
Yeah, it's a lot of overlapping. It's kind of similar to the DFW in that, Dallas has like Dallas, Fort Worth, the mid cities, and then up to Denton and stuff like that. The DMV, DC is like very similar because it's like Virginia is very much culturally the South, and then it overlaps with DC, which is its own like metropolis, and then Maryland is like a weird amalgamation of both the South and metropolis, and then there's like Baltimore, which is its own cluster. it's its own thing, and then you're close to like Philadelphia and Delaware and New Jersey and New York, so it's really good. It's amazing up here.
Yeah, you're like almost kind of like the hub for the East Coast, basically. You're the DFW hub for all the East Coast. You're not too far north or south. You could probably go to Florida, not too far of a drive.
Yeah, I mean, Florida is a little bit far, but like Atlanta is like, it took us 10 hours to go to Atlanta, which isn't bad. You know what I mean? Like, especially if you're from Texas, that's like that's a drive, but it's not excessive. But like you can get down to like North Carolina in like 4 hours. So
yeah, that's one thing. Like you realize how small other states are when you move out of Texas, because I've driven to El Paso and that's like a 8 or 9 hour drive, and you're still in Texas from start to finish. Like you're still with El Paso, you're probably 30 minutes from the border, maybe tops.
In the amount of time it would take you to drive to El Paso, or even like South Padre, right, which is like 8 hours, 10 hours maybe from Dallas. I could have driven to Boston and then past Boston a little bit, and probably into Vermont, because from here to Boston is 6 to 7 hours. Here to Connecticut is 6 to 7 hours, and then it's like 3 hours from both of those places into Vermont driving. So that's
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just saying it's 8 states or something. But
so have you made that trip to Boston or to New York from DC at this point?
Yes, yeah. I routinely go up to. I've been up to Boston. I'm trying to go back soon. So because it's so easily accessible. It's just like, might as well go up. Like New York is legitimately 3.5, 4 hours away, which is the distance between Dallas and Houston. So
that's really, I guess, like enticing.
That's very nice.
So how long have you been in DC? Has it been a year?
It's been 3.
Oh my God. Like
It's
I
been
didn't
3.
feel like it's been
I
3 years. Like it always feels like it's been a year or so since you moved up there. I forget that you like pretty much moved up right as I took over like Hyena's booking for the openers. Like and I forget that was back in 2018.
Yeah. It's also weird because like COVID happened, so we all lost like a chunk of time. But yeah, it's been 3 years. It was like 5 of us all moved at the same time to different cities. And
yeah, Baji's in the West Coast. You're on the East Coast. I think Damon and Dalton's up in New York.
Yeah, Dalton's in New York. Jamie Gravy had moved, but he's back in Texas now.
So what have you? Do you think you've benefited from moving from Dallas? Did Dallas comedy benefit you in any way when you moved to DC, or do you feel like you started over?
I mean, I think when I moved, I was 3 years, maybe 3.5 years in. And so most of that had been spent in Dallas. And like, I was very good when I left. Like not to toot my own horn, but I think I was like good. And when I came up to DC, like it was very evident that like Dallas had prepared me very well. Like people that were my year were about the same level, and they had you remember Dallas back in the day. It was great, but it was we didn't have like a hub close to us. So it's not like Austin wasn't what it is now. So it was like we were all kind of just like, if you were traveling, you might have been going to Austin or you might have been going to OKC, but like neither of those cities were as well versed in comedy as they are now. So it's not like you were thriving in Dallas. We were kind of just making it on our own and kind of putting our people up. And then at a certain level, they would leave to New York or LA. And when I got out here, even though DC has like very good access to New York and East Coast cities, and its comedy scene is fantastic, I think. And its comedy scene equips its comedians in like very beneficial but different ways than Dallas. When I came up here, it was like, oh yeah, no, I'm fine. Like I'm thriving up here, and I think my strengths that Dallas gave me were a lot different than like people of a comparable time and skill level to me when I got here. So DC is like a great comedy city because for several reasons. One, that it's easy access to the East Coast, but 2, because all the people in DC are like, there's a range of ages, but they all work in either consulting, government, or contracting of some sort, which are very high stressful jobs that necessitate you to be on for 8 to 10 hours and like work your mind. They're always looking for something fun to do. And so what that manifests is like people, like everything is always packed, and like comedy shows, if it's a paid show, if it's an open mic, it's always going to be packed, which is great, especially developmentally for you to like deal with that. But then when I got up here and I'm sitting here, I'm thriving, 5 people, 3 people, 15, I'm making a good show no matter what. But like anything less than kind of packed house, they would be like, start sweating and not know what to do. So they don't always know how to deal with kind of like rough rooms, if that makes any sense, like hostile rooms.
Okay. And
so that was something I noticed, was that because Dallas, as great as it is, we're gonna be more likely, just given the nature of Texas, to run into more hostile rooms outside of the clubs. I was very well versed with that. You know what I mean? We had what was that place up in Louisville? We had hat tricks. You know what I mean? Yeah. I did hat tricks for 2.5 years. I'm a veteran of like yelling at people and having things thrown at me. Up here, that's unheard of. So people would be kind of scatterbrained if they had to do a room like that. But it's not. I think DC has made me a better comic in terms of like my ability to like craft jokes that I think are better suited to my personality and closer to the comedy I want to do. But I would never exchange that for like Dallas is like out of the frying pan into the fire. Like, bro, you got to be good at comedy or else you're gonna get yelled at by a very drunk 48-year-old woman who doesn't love her husband and is at this bar just to drink and forget.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Dallas is to me, it's a very underrated scene. And
it puts out like consistent hitter. I'll like everybody that leaves Dallas and goes to a new city immediately within like a year, maybe not immediately, but within like a year or two, establishes themselves as like a top person of whatever city they've moved to. And I think that's because they have the base that Dallas provided them.
I just think what makes us great is that no audience is really a comedy audience, whereas the East Coast has had comedy shows for years. So I feel like they have a comedy club behavior that they kind of treat it like an opera or something like that. So it's something that people, yes, you'll always have people in the room, but you'll have people that are always respectful. Whereas in Texas, no one knows what's going on. They have their own ideas of what comedy is, and so they start heckling you. They'll start talking, or, you know, they'll have a conversation. You have to learn how to adapt and overcome to that scene. And that's where I think, again, what you were talking about with the rough stuff, that they don't have the bar shows because everybody knows what comedy is about. And so they're kind of like, okay, they're prepared for comedy. Texas, even if we have like a comedy audience,
yeah, that's no guarantee that they're going to be there for comedy.
Yeah, some people sometimes they think, you know, that they should talk to you during the show, and it's like, no, that's not. We're helping. No, you're not helping.
No, you're not. That's not what's happening here.
Yeah, and so I feel like you benefit from being in an uneducated audience as far as what the verses of comedy versus, you know, a DC, New York area where everybody's aware of how comedy should be. And because there's comedy is such a regular event in their city, like in New York, it's 7 days. There are paid shows that you can go watch national headliners 7 days a week, Monday through Friday.
Yeah. And even DC is not that far off from like 7 days of like quality comedy.
Yeah. Paid show. Paid admission, not paid for the comics. Those are two different things.
No, even paid for the comics. Even paid for the comics up here in DC. We got them maybe not 7 days a week, but pre-COVID, it was close to 7 days a week. You could do a show where you could get paid. Yeah.
I would say we're getting to the point where, you know, there's a Wednesday show here, you know, like a paid Wednesday show, but very rarely. Most of the time it's Thursday through Saturday here. And so, and that's such a different aspect, is because we just live and die by the Dallas Cowboys here. Like, this is such a sports city. Like, it is.
Yeah. And they have like, Dallas has its like thriving music scene. It has its like, obviously sports. It has a lot of things like entertainment wise. And like, so, I mean, so does DC, but like, I don't think comedy was never one of the things that Dallas would put as one of its top attractors, even though it should have been, you know what I mean? Because it's like the quality was always there, but people are just.
It's rich, stuffy old, I guess, oil tycoons and trust fund kids. And so they, you know, have the front row to everything, and they just don't, you know, outside, you know, I think Netflix here is more detrimental than it is maybe in other cities, just because you have quality comics. Is that your roommate?
Oh, can you hear? God damn it. It is. That is my roommate.
I was like, it sounds like either that or you're watching The Real Housewives. I don't know.
No, he's just very loud.
Okay. Fair enough. But so how did you meet your roommate? Is this somebody you moved there with, or is it somebody that you met that's a DC, like more DC? Are they also a comic?
Yeah, both of my roommates are DC comedians. When I moved here, I was living with this girl that was my roommate when I was in my master's program. And she's the one who got me the job up here, and I moved here. And then like COVID hit, and we just decided we were better off as friends and not as roommates. So we had a roommate.
Sounds like a relationship more than roommates, but
yeah, I was gonna say. Well, it was. I mean, there was no formal relationship. We never were, but it was like we'd known each other. We've been living together for like 4 years at that point. You know what I mean? So it was like 1 year in our master's program, and then 2.5 up here, so close to 4 years, and then COVID hit. And she's a wonderful person, very quiet though, and very like reserved.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, when COVID hit, and I think like all comedians, I was going a little bit crazy because I wasn't talking to anyone. So I would talk to her, and she was very nice about it. Like, she would talk to me, but she's like introverted 100%. So she doesn't like talking. So there was just a issue where it was like my minimum threshold of talking was well beyond her maximum threshold of talking, and it very quickly turned into two parents that like stopped loving each other a long time ago, but are staying in the marriage for the kid. You know what I mean? Like that was the energy that was in the house at all times. So, and I had already decided I was moving at that point. So once everything opened up, I knew these two guys, and they were like, we were all kind of looking for a place to live. We stumbled onto our house, which is like very good rent in a very nice part of town. So we just all moved in together.
Is that saving you any money from the previous situation, having 2 extras, or is the house cost? Does moving in with 3 comics in this house like cheaper, or did it end up costing, a little bit more to get the house versus an apartment?
It was the same, okay. Roughly. I'm paying about $5 less.
Okay.
Now that I live in the city, and I live closer to all the mics and all the shows and stuff, so it makes more sense.
Plus, it's a house. I feel like that's a much better situation. You're not having to go open an apartment or get to a complex or find parking. You have a driveway.
Yeah, and then we're all comedians, we all kind of understand each other's schedule. I think which is great, because we'll all come home, and it'll be like, before, when I was living with regular people, I would come home and I wouldn't start cooking dinner because I would get off work at 7 and then go do mics and stuff and shows, and I wouldn't come home until maybe 10 to 11:30. And then I would cook dinner and stuff. So like people, they would be like, "Oh, Jay, you're cooking dinner at 11:30. That's late." I get home here and I start cooking dinner. My roommates are either in the middle of cooking dinner, or they're walking in after me and being like, "Hey, so what are we making for dinner?" You know what I mean? It's like a better understand each other.
I guess it's more like minds. And what would you say is your biggest challenge in the DC comedy, I guess, scene now that you're, I guess, fairly established, and again hitting, you're in an environment where you've got other comics with you? Like, so what would you say is the biggest challenge as far as the DC comedy scene providing?
Like, my problem is right now is probably the same as everyone's, which is consistently getting up, because post COVID, we're just, everything is turning back, is like starting up again. But also, like, I would say I'm at a point where everyone who like knows of me knows that I'm consistently a funny person. Like, I'm consistently good on stage, whether or not I'm like the best or whatever. People would be like, "Oh, Jay, he's a funny comedian." But now it's just a matter of like having the right people, I guess, know that I'm a funny comedian consistently in both in DC, and then like also like I think spreading, like going out and doing comedy in other places is also like something that like I'm trying to focus on, because it's great to be good in DC and get like booked in DC, but you also want to go get booked other places. So it's like making sure to go up to New York and like talk to people and like networking would probably be the long short. It's like that's the most difficult thing. I think, I don't know if you could tell me, because you've been at it longer than I have, but I think past a certain amount of time, that's what it's going to come down to. Is like the most important thing is just networking with people and like getting your tape or getting you across to as many important people as possible that can like help facilitate you.
Yeah, I would say at the moving from opener to middle act and then consistently getting road work is going to be the emailing clubs and seeing if you can get a response to what is your booking process, and stuff like that, and just building rapport to say, hey, you should look at using me in your shows. And so it's a very awkward dance and stuff. It's not something I'm very good at because I'm not used to like trying to talk about how great I am. I'm used to sitting in my room and moping about how bad it's going. And so it's like, oh, this is totally different. I have to somehow, what are my good points? I mean, I have some, but it's hard for you to see your own benefits. It's easier to see your own flaws. And I guess that's just something you always, as a negative person, that's what you always look at is what can I do better? Other than, instead of saying, what do I do well? And so we'll talk, since you're talking about your house and living in a house, we'll transition to what you're afraid of, which is very interesting fear. I don't know how many people have tried to, I guess, take you these places. So tell people what you're afraid of.
Okay, so I personally am afraid of like hauntings and but like real ones, real ghosts and hauntings and being haunted. I don't fuck with ghosts. Like the concept of ghosts is fine, but the actuality of ghosts, which I guess people they're gonna laugh. They're like, ghosts aren't real. Listen, fuck you. I'm not playing with it.
How did this start? Did somebody where did this I guess stem from? Because it's such an interesting idea that you won't even like entertain the idea of going to these places or experiencing it. So it had to have started with somebody.
So I think because you told me to think about it, and I was thinking about it, and I think it's like partially a cultural thing, right? Okay. Where it's like if you're like Black American or even like African, there's this kind of very real sense of like, you, even if you don't believe it, your parents or your grandparents, there's someone in your family that knows about like voodoo and like hauntings and like ghosts and fully believes in that aspect of like whatever, like spirituality, whatever you want to call it. And I think most of us were taught, hey, you know what? We don't fuck with that. Even if you don't believe in that, that shit falls under like the devil category. So if you grew up in a very Christian household, it's like, that's the devil shit. So on that level, I think I never really like haunted houses, like Six Flags haunted houses or whatever. Those are clearly fake. But then when you get to things where it's like, oh, this person was murdered brutally, or this person was, like I was telling you, that there's a house in like New Orleans where it's the house of Marie Laveau, who's like a slave owner who like experimented on all of her slaves and like cut them open and would slit their stomach and leave them alone to see how long they survived. And people go into that house and they like tour and they're like, oh, this is the house where she like chained 4 slaves up and had them fight each other to the death. Like I'm okay. I don't, and I have been in situations where, let's just put it like this. I have dated a fair share of Caucasian women who find that type of thing very interesting. And they'll be like, let's go do this. And I'm like, why would no. Beyond the fact that that is the recipe to dying in every horror movie that you'll ever see. I don't fuck with it. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. I'm like, it doesn't sit right with my soul. However you want to put it. I don't like I fully believe, I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I do believe in haunting. Like I do believe in like the bad energy of it. And nope. Not gonna happen.
Not to mention, I would say the Black character in horror movies has a very short shelf life.
That's how we die, is we go and deal with and I'm
hanging out with white people. That one guy that hangs out with white
exactly.
These white people aren't so bad.
Exactly. And then they end up dead. Not I, said the fly, not me.
But I just feel like there is more of I would say there's more of a sense of community. I would say, like you said, with family and stuff like that, there's more of a religious connection. And I don't know if that's just because that's what you had, growing up, like you had your religion, because I feel like, I guess maybe growing up as a Caucasian, like you have more of a privilege. You don't have these, I guess, things that you worry about that maybe the African American or another minority community do worry about. And so there is more religious and more like, looking for either answers or assistance from beyond, like not just the, like with real humans, like for, like the religious, the God, Allah, whoever you pray to, like that. I feel like they're like the minorities look for more divine intervention, I would say would be the way for it. So maybe there is more of a connection there, so that all that spiritual stuff is really, even though it's not something you like worship, but it's something that's in the back of your mind, that there's evil around us.
Yeah, and I don't know, like I haven't been to church in years. I don't really subscribe to any religious beliefs, but I do know for a fact that I just don't fuck with that. Like I'm sorry, I'm cursing up a storm on your podcast. Okay. But I just don't. And it's weird too, because it's not irrational, but it's not exactly a rational fear. It's like, oh yeah, I just don't fuck with devils, demons, and ghosts and all of that. But like, I will like react viscerally, because people have tried. They've been like, no, let's go. And I react very, like anybody who has like a kind of fear. It's like, at first you're very polite about it. Like, no. And then you get forceful. And then you start reacting very viscerally, where you're like, absolutely fucking get that shit the fuck away from me. And that's how I'll be like, no. And then people will start being like, no, come on. Like, no.
So you've never like tried to conquer it, or you're just better off with like ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss. I'm good. Like I don't understand people like ghost hunters and shit like that, where they go specifically into haunted mansions, like real, like, oh, like I said, someone was murdered here, or 18 virgins were raped and then killed. Like, no, I'm not fucking with that. That just seems like bad juju to begin with. But then I don't, and they're like, oh, if you sit quietly, you can feel the haunting of the. No, I'm good. I don't want to conquer it. I don't want to experience it. Because my luck is I would go into one of those things, and then the ghost would like follow me back to my house, and now I'm haunted. Look, I don't want that. I don't know.
First of all, why do you think you're so popular? The ghost is like, this guy cool to kick it with. You just think?
I mean, first off, have you met me, Perio? I'm very. I can't even say that with a straight face. No, I don't know, man. The ghost. You might be right. The ghost might be repelled by me. It might be like, ugh, look at this piece of shit. But still,
I would think it would want to go with the person that it could like communicate with, because it's like you with being the extrovert. Like it's just they want to talk and stuff, and they're just stuck with some introvert that doesn't respond. So they just they move on to a new person that maybe can actually sense their presence. Like, oh, finally,
you contacted me. Yeah, no, I'm.
So have you ever messed with a Ouija board? Have you ever do you mess with Ouija boards or anything like that even?
Nope. And in fact, every time I see one of them things, especially in movies, I'll be laughing. I'll be like, fucking white people. I cannot tell you the amount of time I've shaken my head and said fucking white people in a movie. Because I've never messed with a Ouija board. The closest thing I might have done, even in regard close to any of that, would be like playing light as a feather, stiff as a board as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's it. I know people who are real witches who are like who pray to the devil, and like that. I'm not gung ho about you praying to the devil, but listen, baby girl, whatever works for you works for you. But even that is less freaky to me than the idea of like being haunted by a real ghost. Nah, I'm good.
I really don't understand the concept of prayer for me, because it's one of those things like it doesn't matter who you pray to. At some point, you've got to do it. It's not them. You have it. To me, it's all you. Like I, as a religious person, I feel like if a supreme, being loved me, like supposedly loves you like nobody else, why do I have to commit a day to you? I would think that you would know my love is implied and be cool, but I have to take a whole day off and pray to you and thank you, and that doesn't seem like somebody that loves me. That someone feels like they just need to feel powerful, and I feel like,
yeah.
To me, I've always just been like, it's you. It's somehow, you've got to make things happen. It's kind of like, I would say it's also, I was talking to another comic about like dating and stuff. I was like, it's not a lightning bolt that hits you. It's like the rain. It's not going to be something that you're just completely, it's like, this is a sign, like it's just immediate. It's like a rain. It's just a steady drip of constant opportunities that you can or can't, you can choose to take or choose not to take. I feel like that's how I've always approached life, is just, try to take advantage of many raindrops as I can and maximize those, rather than look for the one big thunderbolt sign that I should be, that I'm doing this. That's how people approach comedy too, is they'll look for that one blazing sign that, that Netflix is looking for them. And I'm like, but you have to somehow take these little opportunities and weave them and make a tapestry.
It's one of those things where it's like in every religion, no matter which religion you believe in, there's this kind of like sentiment, I think, of like, any God will only do for you what you do for yourself, right? Like they'll help you in as much as you help yourself, which I think is like it kind of defeats the purpose of an all-powerful deity. But like what you were saying, there are going to be little steps you can take to achieve your goal, and you waiting for some like grandiose sign saying this is the way is counterproductive inherently to you actually taking the steps to achieve your goal.
Yeah. And I feel like some people get those things construed, and again, that goes back to a lot of the haunted hang is just ancient religions also interwoven with Christianity and things like that. And I feel like haunted houses and stuff it's just basically it's spiritual oppression. Like when you look at the ancient Bible and stuff, like the Lutheran Bible, like when he wrote the Bible was chained closed. Like they were wrapped it in chains so you couldn't read it. And so I feel like there's always this completely, about religion. And then there are those that are wanting more. And the people that are wanting more are kind of threatening the status quo of what religion is, which is it's an ability to kind of, yes, in some ways it helps mold society into doing the right things and being a good person. But eventually I feel like there's just too much temptation to not allow, I guess, growth. And so it's like there's always this fear of change and progression. Like we should stay the same. I feel like that's different. As getting older, you just want to grow. I mean, there's so much knowledge that I've gotten just by doing stand-up that I would have never had I not done this. And I feel like that's where all this haunted house stuff comes from, is it's a way to try to hold society back. And it's, all these people that were murdered and stuff, where they're kind of it's like either they're insane or they just want to, they're sad in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
I totally get what you're saying too, because it's like, why would I want, I already have anxiety about my life as it is. Why do I want to go, add more anxiety to this of you might, be contacted.
Yeah. And I think even if there's an element also of like, even if this isn't true, maybe like ghosts don't exist, you're venerating like this kind of like negative energy, right? You're venerating this like bad thing that happened, and that's just not something that's not conducive at all. Anyway,
exactly. You're just basically you're preserving the tragedy of a historical tragedy for your own gain.
Yeah, that's
a fair thing, because everybody talks about like monuments and things like that with the I guess the the progression of society is, I guess, more minorities, are naturalized. Like we're the Pung and Tony Hinchcliffe situation. I was explaining to people like I don't understand, jokes are jokes. I'm like, but to certain, I was like, they're jokes, but they're not as funny as they are now because the people that these jokes are about are no longer just immigrants, or they're not from another country. Their kids are born here and they're grown up as adults, and it's now you're getting more now Asian American communities, Latin American communities. It's not Mexican, Mexicans or Chinese. It's an Asian community. These people have lived here long enough to have children that are now adults, and those children are now the ones that are saying, hey, I'm not going to sit here and just laugh at you like my grandfather and my father did because my grandfather and father wanted to stay in this country. No, I'm an American citizen, and I'm here to tell you that that's actually offensive, that my dad, even though he smiled and laughed at your joke, came home and it affected him. And I'm not going to be it. And that's where people, I think, don't realize that, yes, in the moment, those people may have laughed, but that's not because they thought it was funny.
It's because they didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. Because there's nothing else they can do. It's not like they didn't have the ability to cancel. Those people were afraid for their livelihood and how they would provide for their loved ones.
Yeah.
And people don't see that. People, a lot of my racial peers don't see that. They just see it as, we're just, the elbow and the, hey, we're just kidding with you. But some people don't want to be kidded with. They don't want to be joked about. And I get that.
Or maybe just not in that way. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's I think there's a threshold, and there's not to sound like my parents, but like there's a time and a place, right? And it's like, was the joke funny is debatable, but like the context in which he said it and the people maybe not everyone's going to find what you say funny. And I think that's the key thing is, right? It's like, not everyone's going to find what you say funny, and you can't begrudge people for feeling justifiably a way about your joke towards them.
Yeah. And that was what I was just trying to explain to him. I was like, there was a time period that it was okay to put hands on a woman, and like we progressed past that. We're growing as a society, and I get that some people don't. It's a whirlwind to them that all of a sudden, hey, we can't do that. We can't. We feel like we're getting things taken away. It's like, no, we're just growing. We're realizing that even though those things happened, that maybe they shouldn't have. It's not that they didn't. Yeah. It's whether we should. And I get drawn into it. I get the comedian side that, that you don't want anything to not be off limits. But at the same time, you're not showing it in a creative way.
Yeah. It's not that it's off limits per se, like the idea of joking about someone being Asian I think as comedians, there's this like you said, there's this sentiment where they're like, oh, why can't we joke about it? It's like, it's not that you can't joke about it, but like maybe the standards of what would have been considered funny towards that that subject have changed. So if you're going to make a joke about it, now you have to adhere to the new standards. It has to be funnier. It has to be a better written joke in a way that like it doesn't immediately come off as offensive. Because if a joke can be offensive, the thing is there's a ratio to it. It has to be more funny than it is offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And that changes with the times, but like, and you know, maybe we're at a point where now that type of joke has to be more funny in one way than it is offensive. But like, that's the nature of our job.
But yeah, I feel like it's a scale that's balancing, and it's slowly we're getting to this point. Like again, more people with alternative, like immigrants, alternative lifestyle, and all that stuff's becoming more normalized, and as it becomes more normalized, they have more of a voice in society, and they're starting to use that voice. And the people that don't want to, I guess, progress are not realizing that, hey, your audience isn't predominantly white, or you know, there's going to be alternative lifestyle LGBT couples, and there's going to be you know, a room of Asian Americans. We're starting to get to all your audience is now more color than it used to be.
Yeah.
And you have to somehow make that universally funny and do it without just, you know, the very low hanging fruit jokes, because stereotypical stuff is going to go away because these people have a voice, and they're going to say that's not funny, and they're going to say it because in a way it's not. Like in some of them they're not funny, and when it's not funny, they're going to let you know that, hey, I don't appreciate that this is what you portray me as.
And I think you hit the nail on the head though. It's now the standard is beyond the low-hanging fruit, and some people are going to feel a certain type of way about like, oh, I can't do the easy joke. But it's like, if you were the type of person that wanted to get the easy joke off every time, then maybe comedy wasn't for you to begin with.
Yeah. And that's just kind of something I've watched over the 15 years I've done stand-up, is just how the times have changed, and how I would say, you know, even though people, I would say we're more impatient now than we were when I started. I think that society with social media and all the information that's out there just think that everything should move so quickly. And I was like, it just doesn't. And I was like, we are changing. We are getting better. There are things you go watch. Like I watched Con Air, and they had Showtime. They had Wild Hogs on, and it's like you go watch Wild Hogs, which is now a 15-year-old movie, but some of the jokes in there, it's like, like kind of, I don't think they could actually say those now. Like some of the jokes in Wild Hogs, which is PG-13 at best. And there's still like homophobia references throughout that movie. Yeah,
I mean, you look at things like the scary movie series, right? Like Scary Movie 1, which is funny, but like the villains are like, which I spoiler alert for a almost 20-year-old movie, but like the villains are like two secretly closeted gay characters. And the joke is that they're gay, that they and it's like, you can't, that's not flying in today's society.
Yeah. You're not pitching that to an executive.
Exactly. You're gonna get.
And that's why I tell people, it's like, go back and look at some of this. Look at TV in the 70s. They were able to say racial slurs on live national TV. I'm not talking like HBO or Netflix. I'm talking like ABC, CBS, NBC had. Go watch Archie Bunker. Like there were actual hate, like almost like hate speech in the 70s. And And I get that some of that stuff's funny, but as it's funny because you don't know the meaning of it. And as people learn the meaning of it, then you start to see that stuff gets pulled off of TV. Like, again, when I was a kid in the 60s or 70s and early 80s, the gay man was the comic relief. Like, he always, like Jack Tripper, commonly stereotyped as a straight guy that pretends to be gay, and how outlandish. And that was the only character gay people were just the flamboyantly, comic relief. They were the foil to the straight man.
Even like shit like Will and Grace, which was like very ahead of its time for when it came out, is like, still you look at it in today's lens and you're like, ooh, this might be a little bit problematic.
Yeah.
Or something like what's the Sex in the City, which for very ahead of its time for like presentation of like women being comfortable in your sexual with like your sexualness, and still very problematic. They're making jokes about how Samantha's a whore, and it's like, you can't get away with those jokes today.
Well, some of that stuff, the behavior stuff you can, but I was just thinking like on pure racial or stereotyping. Like, you see shows like they have LGBT shows on Showtime, HBO, like series, like we had True Blood, but I mean, like, it's the real life kind of maybe glamorized a little bit, but more day to day of LGBT, homosexual, and it's just becoming more of a normal thing, and it's very neat to see, but people are like, why is this happening? I'm like, because there are people that still want to drag their heels and don't want to let go of when they had, when they ruled the world, basically, because it's a scary thing. I cannot, it's a scary thing to think at some point you're not going to have control. And so you're going to fight tooth and nail to keep what control you have. And it's religious oppression. It's, that's one thing. Like, I don't like the churches. I feel like sometimes it's oppressive. And I feel like, again, it breeds all this haunted stuff, because it's always people that are either religious, this guy's an outcast, and so the religious townspeople banded together and took it upon themselves to take his life or brand them as witches in the Northeast. So, this woman didn't have a husband, lived out by herself. I think she's a witch. I think we should, we need to drown her in a lake.
Witch burner.
Yeah. Things like that. And I feel like it all comes back to, again, wanting to make sure your religion's the right religion. And so any kind of dissension or whatever was, in my book, this seems like you're an evil person. This is what we do to evil. And it's just terrifying. That's to me is the scary part of the haunted house, is just the belief that what they were doing was right. And that it empowered you to take the law into your own hands, which I don't understand. If you're a Christian, how you can, look past "thou shalt not kill," but she's a witch. But still, you're breaking that commandment.
Yeah, I mean, like, we could go on for days about how, Judeo-Christian beliefs and like things like the Ten Commandments are less commandments, and if you look historically, are more like general guidelines that very routinely are tossed to the side, and that does have like an aspect to do with like that kind of like negative energy. I'm sorry if you can hear my roommates in the background. Yeah. But that kind of like negative energy is like propagated throughout society, and it does kind of like lend itself negatively to like how everyone like operates and belief systems.
It seems like it's always the flashpoint to all these haunted house places that, these haunted locations where it's, a group of people believed in one thing, and because of that they were persecuted and murdered. And in one lens, that's cool that you're giving them, publicity, and you're wanting to tell that story. But to make me stay in a prison or walk through like a walking Ouija board through this whole, tragedy. I just think it's a sad piece of history, and I understand that some, history should be preserved, but I was like, you can't write a book. You just got to do this, You
got to do this thing. Yeah. I also think there's like a sentiment of like fear of the unknown out of it, right? Where it's like this, and it that is like the basis of religion, right? It's like the fear of the unknown. These things we can't explain. We explain through the perception of something greater than myself, right? Like all religion is predicated on the belief that something greater than yourself is causing you these things that you don't know, and that fear of the unknown calls you to make, whether or not your religious belief is true is another argument, but like that historically, that's what caused, the concept of religion to kind of come into being. It's like, hey, these things greater than us must be caused by something greater than us, that fear. Mm-hmm. And this is like a delineation of that fear, where it's like, hey, these horrible things that have happened through, fear or through like persecution or whatever, have manifested or have alleged to have manifested in this thing, and into like a ghost or into a poltergeist or something. And me, I'm like, I'm good. I'm very much I see with my eyes and I hear with my ears. And so that unknown is, I'm good. That fear of the like, we don't know what's around the corner. And I think like there's a lesser version of that in like even something as silly as like jump scares, right? Mm-hmm. Like people being like, boo. It's like, oh, we don't know where it's coming from, that unknown element. And now it's like, yeah, but this is like on a spiritual level, or a spiritual level.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Jay. I enjoyed it. Where can people find you on social media if they want to check out your comedy?
Yeah, no, for sure. On social media, I'm the same on all social media, just Jay Agbon was here. So JAYAGBON was WAS here. Okay. HERE.
Very Brooks.
And yeah, very much. Was just trying to figure out a nice place to say, a nice thing to do, and a nice like name to take. And that just stuck out to me. But yeah,
I like it.
You can find me on YouTube. Just look up Jay Agbon Comedian. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm all over. I'm on TikTok. Jay Agbon was here.
Okay.
I'm out here trying to get the kids, man. You get the kids invested. We're going tomorrow.
All right. Well, good luck with that. I like that tag though as a comedian, because I mean, you could literally say that could be, that's a great way to close your show. You follow me. Jay Agbon was here because you were here. Yep,
I was here. I had like all last summer. I had like my summer series where I was like putting up videos, and I had like a Jay Agbon was here logo, and I was like, this is me, man. Just to let you know, I was, like you said, I was here. I came. Okay.
Well, you were here. Thank you for coming on the show, talking about your fear of haunted houses. And
thank you for having me.
So that was Jay. That was a really good conversation. I enjoyed that. We got a little off topic talking about religious and racial oppression, but that kind of, a lot of this haunted, like, things that happen, like tragedies and things that happen in history that are said to still be haunted are, sometimes the injustice of people that were inspired to be that way. And other times it's just acts of cruelty. And it's something that, we all struggle with as humanity. It's just something we all could work to get better at. And hopefully we will. Like I feel we are moving in the right direction. It just, sometimes you wish it was quicker. And there are times it's just not that doesn't move that fast. So it was a real interesting conversation. I don't know how I would react to a real haunted house. Like, I dig the history, but at the same time, do you want to channel into other people's pain, from that event? It's a very fine line. Like, Mela Borowski, does a lot of the stuff. She was my guest in like episode 50, where we talked about her face blindness, but she does a lot of haunted and spooky tours and stuff. And so some of this stuff, there are things that should be told and other things, that I wonder if they should be. And so you walk that line, you live life, and you try to take it not too seriously. But it was a real interesting conversation. Check out Jay at Jay Agbon was here on all social media. Also check out his YouTube. He's got a show in DC called The Heavyweights. So check that out. The Heavyweights Comedy Show is a monthly showcase here in the Washington, D.C. area. So check them out. They're doing some great things in the D.C. area. Mostly at the Crown of Crow. I thank you guys again for listening to Some of All Yours podcast. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. It helps the visibility of the show. I thank you guys for listening to the Sum of All Fears. Have a good week. Also, I will be at Hyenas in Fort Worth on Saturday, October the 30th. So come out, check out the 325 show. It's going to be 3 of our feature comics like myself doing 25 minutes each. Sure to be a fun time with 2 shows, 7 and 9:30. So check out the shows. Enjoy your week. And now some thank yous for the folks that make this show possible. Thanks to Barry Whitewater for my art and graphics. You can follow him on Instagram at bwhiteh2o. Get it? H2O like water. You can also follow him on Facebook, Music. A huge thank you to Gunnar Olsen for the wonderful music provided for this podcast. You can follow him on Instagram at gunbuns, that's GUNBUNS, as well as his website, gunnarolsen.net. Check out some of the samples that he has recorded. They're amazing. He's an amazing percussionist. If you want to follow the show, we've got a Facebook group, Some of All Fears. Instagram, Twitter, you can find us at Some Fear Fans. If you have some feedback for the show, email me at somefearfans, SOMEFEARFANS @gmail.com. I'll be happy to take those into consideration. Also, if you'd like to be a guest, email me at somefearfans@gmail.com. We can try to iron out some details and get that settled in. Give us some feedback. If on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a review. It makes the show bigger, and it's not going anywhere. I'm going to record as many shows as I possibly can. If you want to follow me on social media, I am at Ryan Perio. It's RyanPerio on all social media platforms. You can follow me there, and you can check me out at ryanperio.com, my website. I'll try to list upcoming shows there as well. It's been kind of spotty because as soon as I set it up, that's when the pandemic happened, and everything's kind of just in a holding pattern. Thanks again for listening to the Sum of All Fears podcast. Next week, we'll have another guest with another fear. Thanks for listening.